Hello everyone and welcome to the part 2 of advanced color grading for Mavic 2 DLog-M. In case you missed the part 1, check out the link in the corner because some of the things I explained there won't be explained again here, just for the sake of keeping the length of the video as short as possible. In this tutorial you will learn how to create some new looks, but what I mainly want from you to learn in this video are some new techniques I'll be showing. Those include dehazing your shots, changing the color of your objects, working with advanced curves in Resolve, matching your shots to one another using the layer node, and animating your corrections using keyframes. Again, this tutorial is aimed towards more professional users, but I've explained some beginner stuff in the previous tutorial and I'll explain them in this one too. Feel free to ask in the comments below if anything is left unclear. All of the looks from this tutorial and from the previous one are available to purchase as LUTs on the link in the description at 80% discount. And because of the high demand, I'll be extending the 80% discount for the whole store until January 21st. With everything said, let's jump right in. Alright, so let's start from where we left off. First thing, as always, we're gonna apply an official LUT. Remember, you can do it this way too. Alright, now let's white balance the shot. I can already see that my white balance is pretty good. I'm just gonna introduce a bit more blues. Okay, before and after. Alright, so we have this shot with slowly tilting the camera down towards this boat. And again, as I mentioned in the previous video, we should denoise our shot, but I'm not gonna do it because noise reduction isn't freely available in DaVinci Resolve. Okay, so let's work on our exposure. As always, I'm using curves. Alright. We can see that our black points are indeed black in the scopes. And we have no true blown out highlights, which would be 100% white. And now I'm gonna introduce some more contrast. Just a nice value of 1.1. Alright. That's good for now. And now I'm gonna really make these mountains pop. They're really not that interesting as of now. So the way I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna go to the first frame and go into my power window and select the custom power window. And I'm just gonna draw a mask around my mountains. We're gonna soften up the mask later, so it doesn't really matter if it's that accurate. I'm gonna extend it a bit outwards. I'm gonna go all the way down here because we have some more of this shore once the camera tilts down. We can fix this later once the shot is tilted down. Alright, and then we're gonna highlight our selection and soften the power window. Maybe we can go back and we're holding the shift key. We can select a bunch of points and move them down a bit. And now we're gonna work on these mountains. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a bit more contrast to them. Mainly lower the shadows. Then I'm gonna go into sharpening and sharpen them a bit. And then we're gonna add some mid-tone detail or clarity, as you might know it from Lightroom. Not too much, but just enough so that it's visible before and after. So what really bugs me now is this haze around here. So we're gonna add a parallel node to this one. And we're gonna add a new power window like this. select the highlight and soften it up quite a bit. Disable the highlight, and then we're gonna add some more contrast to it. Just to artificially dehaze this before and after, much better. And I'm gonna introduce a bit more clarity, maybe like 30, that seems enough. Alright, already much better. But as we can see, these mountains are pulling towards magenta color, and I really don't like that. So we're gonna quickly fix that by staying in this node and offsetting our whole selection away from the magentas. Just a bit. Okay, already much better. So what we now have to do is we have to track our power windows. We covered that in the previous video, so I'm just gonna fast forward through it. And since our power window left the screen now, we're just gonna switch to frame, go a few frames later, and move the power window all the way. Alright, and we're gonna do the same for this power window. I can't believe I actually nailed this part of the power window, huh? Alright, we're just gonna stop it right here. Add a keyframe. Maybe go to this one. And extend it manually, holding shift. And extending it manually. Alright. And continue tracking. Okay, looking pretty good. And here's before and after these corrections. Really subtle, but I really like it. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to really make this ship pop. So the first thing, we're gonna create a custom power window around the ship. As in Photoshop and After Effects, you can click and drag to make a tangent line. Alright. There we have our selection. So we're gonna introduce some more contrast. And maybe some gain. And then we're gonna add some vibrance to it. Now, vibrance is different from saturation because saturation saturates this whole range from 0 to 100% brightness, but vibrance only saturates the mid-tone sections of your image. Now, there's no such slider in Resolve, so we're gonna have to manually work around it. The way we're going to do this is in the Curves tab, clicking right here on Luma versus Saturation. So the way this works is we have 0 brightness and 100% brightness, and as we move this graph up and down, we can see that the midtone section of our image is getting more saturated. If we move just this, only the darkest parts of the image will get saturated, and if we move this, only the highlights will get saturated. So the way we're going to do this is by resetting this and creating a handle right in the middle on the input luminance of 0.5. Then we're gonna desaturate the darkest parts and the brightest parts, selecting the middle handle and bumping up the saturation, maybe to 1.5. Okay. This is before and this is after everything so far. I like to do it this way because I introduce some saturation in general. Some of the shadows will get saturated and I really don't like that because there's usually noise here and I really don't want to saturate the noise. Alright, so once we're done with that, we're gonna create a new parallel node. And right now what we're going to do is we're going to change the color of this ship. Again, we're going to do this with the qualifier. I've already done this in the previous tutorial, so I'm just going to speed up the footage. Alright, so that's done. And now, as we can see, we have some of these shores selected, so we're gonna have to create a new power window. And now we're gonna track it. As you can see, noise is really confusing our tracking, and that's also one of the reasons why you should denoise your footage. Alright, let's go a few frames back, switch to frame, and move this out of the way. And now, with the hue slider, we can change the hue of our ship. You can choose any color you want. I'm not gonna go too crazy, I'm just gonna change it to be a bit more orange. Alright, and now what I'm going to do is I'm gonna saturate these greens just a bit more. I'm gonna do this by going into the curves and into hue versus saturation. So similar like before, we have the hues on the x-axis, and by moving the handles on the y-axis we can saturate and desaturate the image. So we can select the greens with the qualifier and saturate them. We can maybe even widen our selection a bit. Alright. And now we're gonna work on the overall look of our image. I really want to make this whole picture pop. It's really looking moody. Not really that interesting, except for this ship for now. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my mountains. And I'm gonna change their hue just a bit. So same like before. We can introduce some green to them. This was shot in the fall. Already looking much nicer. Alright, and then adding a bit more contrast to make them pop even more. Alright, and then I'm gonna go into this last node and I'm gonna work on my final look. I'm just introducing a bit of yellows to my highlights and a bit of blues to my shadows. And everything is looking much nicer already, before and after. We can even tone down the hue on this just a bit, maybe like 45. Alright, that's looking pretty nice for this shot. And we can go on to the next one. Alright, so with this shot we're gonna go for the similar look like we did in the previous video. And I'm gonna show you how to reference and match some of your other shots to the one you're working on right now. So to begin with, we're gonna apply the LUT. Then we're gonna white balance the shot. Cool it down a bit by looking at the scopes. Then we're gonna introduce contrast. With the curves. Alright. But now I'm gonna save this sky. It's not that interesting, but just for the purposes of the tutorial. With the parallel node, I'm gonna go into the power window and place my gradient filter. Alright, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna remove these mountings. It's easier for me to do it that way than placing this gradient filter exactly right. So I'm gonna do this with the qualifier, and without selecting anything on our frame, I'm gonna unselect the lower luminance values. And there we go. The mountain is unselected, and we're just gonna denoise a bit, add some blur, and move the in and out ratio just a bit. Alright, I'm gonna unhighlight this, and now we can work on our sky separately. I'm gonna lower the exposure of the sky as a whole. I can move my filter a bit more to cover the whole area. And then I'm gonna desaturate it, and then later I will see how it looks in my final image. Alright, I'm gonna add some sharpening and some mid-tone contrast. Before and after. It's looking a lot better, but I'm sure I'm gonna get back to this node in particular once I finish my look. And I also have to track it, but I'm gonna do that in the later stages of grading. I'm just gonna work on this particular framing for now, because this shot has a lot to offer. Now I'm gonna work on this reflection in the sea, just make it pop a bit more and make it overall a bit more interesting. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a circular power window. Alright, and then I'm gonna do the same thing I did before. I'm just gonna deselect the darkest parts of the image. Alright. Denoise, blur, in and out ratio, and maybe clean the blacks just to get rid of these spots right here. Alright. Maybe blur it a bit more. Okay. Now firstly, I'm gonna track this, but I'm gonna track it manually, because I already know once I hit track, this power window will stay right here. It will look at this reflection of the bridge and the bridge itself, and it will not move with the reflection of the sun. Alright, let's reset this and go to frame. I'm gonna add a new keyframe and then just manually jump around the shot and adjust my power window. I was flying the drone quite calmly when I filmed this, so I can get away with just a few keyframes. And here we can see the sky node bleeding in because it's not tracked, so we're just gonna disable it for now. Alright. Okay. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna introduce some sharpening and some mid-tone detail. Before and after, already looking much nicer. And then I'm gonna work on the curves. I'm gonna darken the reflection just a bit, but I don't want to go overboard because it will be quite obvious that we did something with it, as you can see. Okay, let's soften this up a bit more. Alright, and I'm gonna highlight this, and as you can see, the footage is clipping in the reflections. So we're gonna go into the soft clip section and move the high soft just a bit. The high soft works similarly as if you were to take this handle and lower it down, but it just creates a nicer look overall as it's not that harsh. We can fix this a bit. Okay, looking much better. I'm gonna lower the high soft back just a bit. Alright, so now let's desaturate our image a bit to get it towards this clip. Maybe like 30. And now let's introduce some blues into our shadows. Now if we want to match our two shots, what we can do is we can go into the previous shot that's already graded and grab a still. Then we can go into the gallery and with our still selected, go into the shot we're working on right now, close the gallery, and right click on our footage and show reference wipe. That way we can move the reference wipe and see what else we need to do to our footage. And another great thing is that as we're moving this, we can see the differences in the scopes. We can already see that the sky should be a lot brighter, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm not gonna blow it up on purpose like I did on the previous shot. Alright, we can already see that there's much more sharpening and much more clarity in the previous shot, and that we need to desaturate our new shot a bit more and introduce some more blues. We can hide the reference wipe, fit to view, and introduce some more blues. Then desaturate our shot a bit more and introduce some more clarity and add some mid-tone detail. And we can do the sharpening on the same node. Alright. Let's show the reference wipe again. Alright, looking much nicer. What I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna add some yellows into my midtones. I'm gonna do it with the gamma control and just introduce some oranges. And now I'm gonna go into the power window and select the mountains. Add some overhead for the tracking. Alright, and then I'm gonna do the same thing like before, but now I'm not gonna select the highlights. We can see how the highlights disappear right here. We're gonna soften the selection a bit. Alright. And then I'm gonna create a new power window and select this part of the land. Do the same like before and track that as well. Alright, now we have that tracked and we're only applying the gamma correction onto our selection. Let's show the reference wipe. Alright, already looking much more similar. And now let's go back to our contrast and introduce some more of it. All right. everything looks pretty nice except for the sea. But here in this shot we have the reflection, and with something like a reflection you'll never get the same result as without reflection, so don't beat yourself up about it. If we're looking at the image generally, it looks pretty similar to what we have before. I'm just gonna crush the shadows a bit more, really fine-tuning it, and maybe adding some more blues into our shadows as well. Alright, and then we can go into the shore selection and maybe brighten it up a bit, and maybe adding some more mid-tone detail. Alright. That's looking pretty nice. But what happens now, if we zoom in, we can see that our blues in the shadows are being cut off by this node right here. So we can unselect this, reconnect this, and add this right here. And then soften up our power window even more. And now it's fixed. Alright, so my battery died, that I don't know what is and isn't recorded, so I'm just gonna proceed and then do the voiceover for what wasn't recorded. I was just about to fix this power window for the sky because we have some spillage right here and it doesn't look very nice. Alright, let's go into the highlight. I'm firstly gonna reset this just to see how it looks like. And I'm gonna unblur this. Alright, and then I'm gonna add to my selection this, and I'm gonna go back into my power window and soften everything up. Alright, looking much better. I'm gonna introduce a bit more blues. Alright, so our sea isn't looking too nice, it's looking a bit too warm, so we should introduce some more blues. We're gonna do that right here with another serial node by pressing Alt S on your keyboard and adding a custom power window. Alright, then we're gonna go into our qualifier, highlight the selection. Alright. I'm gonna fix up the selection real quick. Alright, I'm going to unhighlight this and introduce a bit of blue into my sea. Already looking much better. And then we can enable our reference wipe again. And see the difference. Alright, I think we matched it quite good. I'm gonna introduce a bit more blues into my sea here. This is before and this is after. Much more dramatic. And there we go, that's how you match two shots in Resolve 15. Let's get on to the next clip. So right here we have this clip of this harbor, and then the camera slowly tilts up toward a city. But this was shot in autumn, and I really want to go for that summer look. So what we're going to do is we're going to color these trees green by using techniques we used before, and I'm also going to show you how to keyframe your grades. Alright, let's begin. Rec 709 LUT. Alright. Since we are going to do a lot of secondaries in this shot, I will denoise this. Again, this will be locked if you are using a free version of DaVinci Resolve, but I'm using the studio version, so I'm gonna input 2 and 10 to denoise the shot. Alright, let's correct the white balance. We can see right here in our scopes that everything is a bit too warm, so I'm going to manually correct the white balance, or again, like I showed in the previous video, you can select this color picker right here and select your white point. Let's create a new node and introduce some contrast. Another way to introduce contrast into your shots is by sliding these sliders right here. For those of you who are beginners and are watching, what contrast does is it takes your highlights and brightens them, and takes your shadows and darkens them. So as we can see, if we do this with the curves, or if we do this with the contrast slider, we get the same result. It's just that when you're using the curves, you control on what brightness values you'll brighten and what brightness values you'll darken. As I said, another way of introducing contrast is by going into the gain and lifting this slider, and by going into the lift and darkening it. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to paint those trees green. First, by going into the qualifier and selecting what we are interested in. Make sure you have the right tool selected. Alright, that's looking good. I may introduce this mountain in the background, but for now I'm not going to. Alright, we're gonna fix this matte. Alright, but as we can see, we are selecting a lot of these roofs because they're the same hue as our trees. So to fix that, we're going to use the layer node. A layer node works similarly like a parallel node, but what happens with layer nodes is the bottom node gets taken into account first and then the top node. So it's similar like working with layers in Premiere, After Effects or Photoshop, except that the bottom node has priority over the top node. So if we select our roofs in this node, they're not gonna get worked on in this node. So we're going to do that. With the qualifier, we're gonna select a roof and fix our selection a bit. Alright, that's looking pretty nice. And now we're gonna go back into our top node and we can work on our trees. Alright, already looking much better. So what I'm gonna do now is introduce this mountain in the background. Alright, but as we can see, a lot of these buildings get introduced as well, and we really don't want that. So I'm gonna undo what I just did and manually introduce the mountain. Just by playing around with the hue, I can get it in and then widen my selection. And then play around with these values some more to really fine-tune what I want selected. Alright, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask to get rid of these ugly spillages around the buildings. So I'm gonna go to my last frame, create a mask really quickly. And I might even introduce some more greens in my gain, which is essentially what I just did, is essentially same as if I were to drag the offset, because offset works on shadows, midtones and highlights all together, and I did pretty much the same thing separately. Alright, and then I'm gonna add my final look, and then we're gonna get into the keyframing. So for the final look, I really want a warm feel, like it's middle of summer. So I'm gonna introduce some oranges into my midtones, and I'll maybe lift up my gain even more. There is some clipping, but I don't mind that. A lot of information is still preserved. I might actually tone it down a bit, just because of these boats, and then go into my high soft and do the same thing like we did in the previous shots. Alright, so in order to keyframe your grades, you're gonna wanna go into the keyframes tab. And here you have keyframe properties for every corrector we have right here. So the nice thing is, we can just enable auto keyframe buttons for any of these correctors, and Resolve will add auto keyframes whenever we make changes. So what I might want to do is start off my shot without this node right here to make the shot a bit more cold, and then once the camera tilts up, I'll want to introduce this node right here. We can do this quite easily by going into the key tab and keyframing this gain output. So since we are on our corrector 8, I'm gonna auto keyframe the corrector 8, and I'm gonna pick my point on where I want this node to start getting introduced. So I'd say right around here. So we're gonna type 0 here, and then maybe pick this spot for it to be fully introduced. And as you can see, Resolve automatically put in our keyframes, and our node is going from 0% opacity to 100%. You can do this with any node or any type of property you're working on. So let's say I'd also like for this part of the shot to have a bit more contrast. So what I can do is go back into my contrast node and auto key my corrector 4, and then pick my spot where I don't want any extra contrast. So let's say right here. So what I'm going to do is right click and add a dynamic keyframe. And then I'm gonna go where I want to my contrast to start fading off, and then with auto key selected, I'm gonna introduce some more contrast. I can also switch to my scopes, and I can really crush those shadows to make the look even more dramatic. And right here we can see that our auto key is made. If we drop down here, we can see that the color corrector property has a keyframe. And if we switch to scopes, we can see that those blacks are really crushed and are starting to lift up as we go through the shot. Alright, maybe I can even make this a bit more dramatic, just so you can see a bigger difference as we go through our shot. Alright, right here we are starting to get into that Mad Max territory. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this 2-part tutorial on advanced color grading your Mavic 2 DLog-M footage. I really hope you learned something and you'll be able to apply it to your shots. Thanks for watching and goodbye.